your astrology chart can do so much more than that. And so I don't want to just talk about, partner, but I want to talk about like romance. Like, what are you drawn to? Sexual activity. Like, how do you like to enjoy sex? Like, what are you drawn to when it comes to sex? And even I like to, once again, like we're talking about releasing that shame. So talking about the kinks, like let's just really get in there and say like all the gritty taboo things.
Hello, fellow soul seekers. I'm excited to share with you this mind-blowing conversation that I had with Cassandra Deanne, and wow, has it got me thinking. She shared her journey from a strict religious upbringing to embracing her true sexual and spiritual self. It's raw, it's real, and it's got me rethinking everything about shame and self-acceptance. Ever wondered what parts of your true self you're hiding to fit in? You don't want to miss this one. It's time to back it up. Let's go. So, can you share a bit about your journey and what led you to redefining your understanding of love and sexuality?
Starting off with a big question.
Let's get right into it.
Yeah, of course. I love it. I love it. So, trying to figure out how to summarize it as short as possible. So I grew up in a religiously abusive home. So during purity culture, so when it came to the idea of what love and sexuality was, it was very, very controlled, very scripted expression. It was like the idea of, especially in religious settings, it's like the female's job was to make the male happy, and even the idea of no sex before marriage, and it was very tightly guarded. There was no expression. It was like, this is the purpose, this is the proper union, this is how we come together. And I'd like to think that through my journey, as I healed and evolved, like I separated from a lot of these narratives. Unfortunately, I realized that I really didn't. And interestingly enough, there were a lot of things about myself that I held a lot of shame about. And I tried in multiple different times in my life to sort of dip my toe in the water to feel like I opened up with others about my unique expression as it related to sexuality. They were not generally well received either by others or even myself. I have since then grown to be comfortable with identifying with a little more open mind with sexuality, such as bisexuality. And of course, coming from that religious perspective, that's not okay. Like, there's this sacred union of what things are supposed to be like. So when I found myself like attracted and drawn to like all these different things, so much shame, and it was like I wanted to be good. I wanted to fit that image. And I tried, at first to kind of like lay a little bit of like, hey, there might be this element of me. It was squashed down by my partner at the time. So I squashed it down. Later on, after my spiritual awakening, the universe tried to get me to go through a sexual sort of awakening and realization. And I can still remember coming again with this same idea of like, Cassandra, look at these aspects of yourself, turn to these aspects of yourself. And once again, I dipped my toes in the water, but then I wasn't ready. So I squashed it down. And so recently the universe was like, all right, girl, enough is enough. Like it's time. And so I went through this unusual with the recent eclipse in Aries, which was significant in my astrology chart, a sexual awakening, which a lot of information opened up to me. And I once again was faced with like confronting these aspects of myself. And I personally love astrology. So it was really interesting to me because as someone who appreciates that modality, I turned to astrology. I was like, okay, what does astrology have to say? So I started to look at signs that you might be bisexual according to your astrology chart. And I literally went down the list, and it was like, okay, if you have a Mars or Venus and Gemini, chances are high. I'm like, okay, there's a check. If you have Aquarius in these particular locations, that's probably a sign. I'm like, okay, check. And it just went down the list of all of these checks. And I was like, this is my energy. Like, if I can accept all of these other aspects of myself, related to life purpose and what I want to help people with and explore, how is it that this is no less a part of who I am? So I have completely redefined my perspectives of sexuality and love as well. But yeah, that's, maybe we'll get into that a little a little later.
So when you say sexual awakening, right?
Yeah.
For most people, awakening in general, they don't know, but now you're adding a sexual awakening. What is that?
Right. So for me, it was really unusual. Part of what I do for what I share with the world is I am an Akashic Records reader. And so there was a very profound experience that I had in which I was in meditation, and my guide said to me, go into your Akashic Records. And this is not unusual for me. It's something I've done many times before. So I thought, okay, sure, we can do that. Sounds like fun. Well, the second I agreed to it and started to go into my records, I had a full body, intense response. And I knew something powerful was on the other side of it. I knew there was going to be some sort of realization. And I look at this as all of our lives, all of our essence of who we are. It's there. Like it's in our DNA. Like it is a part of our physical vessel. And so it was like this way of like my body was saying, this is going to be hard, but yes, it's okay. And there was resistance. When I went into the records, what uncovered was a past life in which I was this practitioner of like a yogini tantric tradition, which is very sexual, because when we're talking about, Tantra, there are many different expressions, not to say it's 100% about sex, but one of the aspects of this is understanding that this was viewed as a path to God. This was viewed as a path to enlightenment. And so it's very much connected to yogic traditions and things along that line. So these yoginis were practitioners of this yogic Tantra type medicine that was used, and there are different rituals. That's a whole nother story. But in this particular vision, I was one of these people, and I did not know what to do with it. Like every ounce of me was completely, like I was literally shaking, crying. This was so conflicting. Like, was this right? Was this wrong? Like, what am I to do with this? And I realized that as this happened, my guides began to unwind the very conditioned beliefs I have around love and sexuality. From that, it was a domino effect where, like I said, I went into my astrology. I wanted a more logical explanation of this. That day, I went outside from where I was meditating, and there was a black snake, a huge black snake on my porch. Like that, I could count on one hand how many times I've seen a snake since I lived in that particular location for over 20 years. And so here was this black snake right there. And as I grew more used to this idea and accepting these portions of myself to where I finally was able to vocalize them outward, a few days later, this snake literally shed its skin on my porch, which the snake represents, if those of you don't know, the divine feminine. And so this was an awakening of the divine feminine expression within myself. And it continued to unfold more and more depth as I went forward with the acceptance of this information the days that followed.
So for those that don't know, the Akashic Records are, what are they?
So Akashic Records, you can look at this as it's basically like an energetic frequency that holds everything past, present, and future. So it's like tapping into, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as like a library. You know, I've heard it referred to as like the tree of life that holds like everything. It's the essence of, we can look at it in quantum concepts as like that material, that space in which there is no time, there is no, you know, everything is now and present. So when you're reading the Akashic Records, you're tapping into that energetic field or frequency that gives you access to anything and everything, you know. So when you're reading past lives, the Akashic Records is usually the energetic field that you're tapping into.
So you go into your Akash and you see that you had this past life that's basically based around sexuality and love.
Yeah.
Right? Which makes sense, because that is, right, life force, prana, for those that, you know, have never heard that, right? That is the creation of life. But not in the way that I think we think about it.
Right.
And so here you are in this religious background. You're taught this way, and now you're being shown this past life that. So, what was, as a practitioner, what are you really doing? So people understand. Like, you see this past life and go, "I'm this tantric practitioner," but what does that mean?
Well, so in this particular past life, you're engaging in different sexual activities. And the idea, so let's just kind of like add in some perspective here of what maybe we could describe Tantra as, because I think there's a lot of information that goes around that would help in explaining this idea. So basically, when we're talking about Tantra, which I am so excited about my journey studying and going into this further, but this is what I can share. And when we're talking about Tantra, we're talking about this energetics of basically being woven together, coming together. And so you hear a lot in Tantra about Shakti and Shiva, these are the divine counterparts of the masculine and feminine. And this has nothing to do with your particular gender. It has everything to do with the unity, the bonding, you know, woven together, Tantra, of these expressions within yourself. And so when we're talking about these ideas and coming from yogic traditions and things, it's about the coming together of all things, the experiences. It's like, you know, in spirituality, sometimes we can decide to like shut down that human aspect of ourselves. You know, we can focus purely on ascension and higher spirituality, which I find is interesting because that's actually more of the masculine expression. Or we can balance and learn both in the human experience and the spiritual experience, and realizing that it's within that we feel that essence of woven together, coming into harmony and unity. So a lot of times when you hear about Tantra, you're looking at a non-dualistic perspective, which means that essentially there's no separation of what, you know, this is higher, this is lesser. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no evil, there's no, I'm ascending because I've like death of the ego and the human experience, and I want no, Tantra is not anything about any of that. It is the balance of both the masculine, the feminine. And so with this, there are many different practices in Tantra, tantric yoga, kundalini yoga. These are all, part of that. There is sexuality is a part of that. It's only like 10% of the total, but yes, there is this element in which you can join in sacred union with someone honoring their expression and your expression, and come together, wove together, a very transcendent spiritual sexual experience. So in this this past life I was engaging in sexual activities with individuals as part of this tradition to ascend, to raise like Tantra also has a lot to do with energy. So it's like raising the energy that's normally on like the sacral level, which is in the like genitals and, that sexual energy, and rising it up to more of the universal love and expansion from the heart. And so that's where we have these like incredible higher experiences sexually.
So when
Hope
you
that
even say
helps.
engaging in sexual activities, like physically engaging in sexual activities or energy work?
Physically engaging in sexual activities. Yes.
Okay. That was in the past life. Because
Yes.
right, trying to allow people to wrap their heads around this, right, without judgment, because
Right.
we judge,
Yeah.
and thinking, oh, okay, so you're basically having whatever, all these
Yeah.
sexual engagements, but isn't that just sex? Like, what makes that spiritual? What makes that
Mm,
tantra? What makes that significance? I mean, you can wrap it as that, but let's be honest, right? I'm sure there's some critics out there going like, let's be honest, this is just a
yeah.
bunch of sex. So
Oh.
what makes that right? What makes that different?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so I think to explore that, this is slightly controversial. I think to explore that, you need to define or we need to consider looking at our perspective of love differently. Okay, so
Okay.
this is my personal belief. Okay, and that is, I believe that we are in a time in which, as Mother Gaia raises her frequency on this planet, we are raising our frequency of this planet. We are expanding and evolving our consciousness. And I believe that ultimately, part of that process in expansion is broadening our perspective of who we are, who others are, who relationships are, what love is, all of these things. Okay, so we hear about unity, right? It's like we hear about that. Okay, so when we talk about unity, this is one big thing I have with relationships and love, because when we're talking about love, I feel like a lot of times people wrap that up automatically to relationships. Okay,
Right.
so there's so many layers even alone with that we can go into, such as people being drawn into our lives for reasons and purposes, opinions about marriage being going against that flow, different things. But let's just focus right now on love. Okay, so if there's unity consciousness, if we are connected and we are all a part of this universal force, if the idea of consciousness expanding is coming into, let's look at it from a spiritual perspective, you do your shadow work, you work on yourself, you heal, you evolve. What happens when you do that? Your heart expands. You become less externally focused on the other person. And instead, you embody who you are authentically and feel like there's permission to be in the world as your unique self. And as you do that, you don't care. Like, I don't care what you're doing, Beckett. You do
Right.
you. I can look at you and I can admire who you are. I can look at you as another conscious expression and be like, wow, this is really cool. Look at me doing me. Look at him doing him. I mean, we don't want to all be the same. That's
Right.
boring, right? So when we heal and evolve, we can start to then increase our expression of love. We expand our heart because I'm no longer looking at you with jealousy, oh, well, he got to go do that. And no, that's just our higher self saying, you need to work on those areas of yourself because you can have that too. So when we do that work, we're expanding our heart chakra. Well, when we do that, and there's less jealousy, there's less comparison, there's less threat to that, our heart expands. Our heart expands more and more greater. Then all of a sudden, we are tapping into the expression of universal love and unconditional love, which means that, that feels incredible. That is a powerful thing to where you can feel so embodied and safe within your own expression that you can admire and love and appreciate everybody else and their unique expression. Okay, so when you're doing that, now you're talking about some crazy freaking awesome love, right? I'm now able to look at someone and it just gives me that feeling. It's like, dang, look at you go. Good for you. That's attractive. That feels really good. I'm excited for you. And we have this feeling and we continue to expand and expand. So ultimately, I believe that our expressions of relationships and love are going to be completely redefined because how they look now, at least from my perspective of how I was raised, is that you find that one person, it's supposed to be in a heterosexual relationship because that's what the church says, and then you own them. They are yours and you are committed to them, and if you're a good person, you kind of deal with all the shit and tolerate through and have that 75th anniversary and everybody looks at you and admires you and say, they did it right, they did good. That is not what I believe life is supposed to be. If our relationships are the exact ingredients to help us evolve and work through our karma, we're literally working against cosmic laws of expansion by saying, okay, all right, I pick you, okay, and we're just gonna do this thing. This is why people get resentment. They're cheating. They're, having jealousy issues. There's dysfunction. They're stagnant. They're lacking in life force energy because I don't believe that's how things are supposed to be. And furthermore, as we expand love, I believe we're going to find ourselves feeling unique expressions that are unfamiliar towards love and connection in a more universal, unconditional aspect of acceptance. So yeah, I could say like Cassandra, are you talking about orgies and multiple polyamorous relationships, open relationships? We could very well be talking about just that because
but I think it's important to realize because I think kind of going back to the original question of then what differentiates that from just being sex with a bunch of people versus a more intimate relationship, right? Because I think that's where people are going to struggle to wrap their head around that and go, I hear you, and that sounds great. Now you're going to have everybody around just having sex, but that's not really what you're saying. I think that bridge needs to be crossed of understanding how do we get from that thinking to understanding that this is a more spiritual connection and transcendence and goes beyond the physical, which is really what, when people think of sex, it's physical. That's what they're thinking. Yes, there should be intimacy and there should be, but let's face it, a lot of that is missing. There isn't a lot of that, especially when you got people addicted to porn and all sorts of things. Like they've removed the entity and just said, this is a sexual act. You see a naked body, you get aroused. That's all that sex is. Some people, not everybody, obviously, there are some relationships that they're healthy and they're intimate. But what we're talking about is how do you bridge that gap into this now, like you said, transcendent experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, you described it beautifully as far as like the difference. I know I went down a rabbit hole. I tend to do that. But yes, that's, the difference, just to reiterate that, is I feel like the intention and the spiritual connection. So when we're talking about bridging the gap and what that looks like, essentially, I feel like what we're looking at is the person. And I believe that this is something that will take time. And I think that there's probably going to be like a real transitional period that we have where there are people that are able to embody this and not. And how we embody this, I believe, is getting to that place of more of an expanded heart chakra. To get there, I think the first step is to release the shame, of all the things that we've been told of how things should or shouldn't. I believe self-acceptance, we can't get anywhere without that first key. So accepting, like I gave the example for myself, bisexuality, okay, the higher octave of that, the spiritual octave of that, as someone who reads the Akashic Records, it's like, I know I've had past lives as male, I've had past lives as female, I've had past lives as androgynous. Yeah, so it's like when we look at it as like, all of that is me. So it's limiting to say this is only, and it's limiting to love to say this can only be the proper expression of that. So, but it's like accepting, like I said, the years of me trying and not accepting, trying and not accepting. Now that I've accepted that, I can see it from a higher perspective of what that is, transcending it from that sexual experience. Oh, she just wants to have sex with like all these different people.
Right.
No, it's a part of my expression, and finding what that higher expression is of that. That is the first key, is releasing the shame and changing our perspectives around sexuality and love.
I think, and I'll circle back to that shame, but I think in breaking this down, right, and we start breaking that down, and this would be an intriguing question to ask you, because I had a anthropologist on the podcast last week. So if you guys haven't checked out that episode, do it. It's amazing. And we touched on these topics, marriage, polyamory. But what was interesting to me, and kind of what I want your take on, is something that really bothered her with the spiritual community was these labels of feminine and masculine energy. It drove, she's like, I detest it because it's just energy. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, why are we labeling it? Why are we partaking it? And for all those that are listening, we all have, whether you like these labels or not, masculine and feminine energy. This has nothing to do with your gender. It has everything to do with your energy. So that's what we're speaking of. So what is your take on that idea and those labels?
Yeah, same, absolutely. I can still recall, like, I stumbled upon a coach, and there's energy out there for everyone, and I know everybody's on their own journey. But for me personally, it was something where it was like talking about the like in a heterosexual relationship, and it was like, well, if your masculine is acting more feminine, here's what you need to do to embody your natural feminine so he can be more masculine, and you can put him back in harmony and balance. And I was like, what did you just say? Okay, manipulation, not authentic expression, the fact that I could possibly control the other individual. No, so many red flags. And so, yes, I know that there is a lot of expression of that. Another thing is, I know there's a lot of groups only that are excluding masculine and exclude, it's like women only. And I'm like, ooh, but aren't we all like on this? And once again, it's hard for me because I try to look at it from different perspectives. I can see where, yes, possibly that could invite more comfort in, the females, a part of it. But I'm like, gosh, let's hurry up and evolve, because this is separation. Like, this is exclusion. And it feels like if it's not brought in harmony, we're gonna just flip the script to the other side. You know, the people that are saying these languages are talking about the toxic masculine expression we lived under. I'm like, but if you're heading down these same exclusions, then you're just flipping it to the other side, and years down the road, our kids are going to be talking about the toxic feminine expression, you know. So we all have the energies, and it's all meant to be in harmony and balance. So I agree in the sense of, I feel like we need to, in Tantra, like everything about Tantra is like huge on that, you know, as far as like, once again, woven together, the union. We all have the things, we're all consciousness evolving, regardless of, you know, what our gender is.
Yeah, because I think, you know, that's the human brain. We need labels, right? That's why we label everything. Like, I always think, like, who labeled a tree a tree?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, who came up with that? So I get it. Our brains need labels to compartmentalize, to understand. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just two different energy frequencies that need to play and work together. It's kind of like the yin yang symbol, right? You've got the black and you've got the white, and it's swirling together, and then in the middle way with the gray, you know, it's just energies. And I think breaking that down first is getting people to understand, oh, okay, like, you know, you'll hear people say, well, this guy's more effeminate, or this woman's more masculine, or did it, and it's like, why do we have to do that?
Yeah,
You know
exactly.
what I mean? It just is energy. They're just energy. And so why can't we honor that, to your point, and say that I honor the energy in you? And I think that's what we're starting to do. So then once we have to break that down, then the next thing of getting back to your shame is, I know there's a lot of shame, especially in the United States. I don't know. I think, and I could be wrong, if you guys are in other countries, I'd love to hear from you and comment below how it is, you know, sexuality in your countries, where we see other countries where they're comfortable. There's naked beaches, or they're comfortable. I remember being at the Grand Teton National Park and seeing this European couple come out of the glacier water lake, just stripped down, buck naked to change, you know, and the Americans were like, oh, like, what, you know, there wasn't a ton of us, but like, what are you doing? And they didn't care. It was no big deal to them. They're like, I'm just changing my clothes. And so how do we get past this shame, especially in the United States, around body image and sexuality? Like, how do we address that for people to overcome that, or even recognize it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a hard one, because you're right. I think that, you know, especially in the United States, and it's like, you can, like you said, look at other, you know, other areas or parts of the world, and where nudity is, you know, tribes, or, you know, Native Americans, or it's just is, you know, because at the end of the day, this is just flesh. It's just my vessel. You know, what makes it sexual is all of the programming that is associated and comes with that. And there are so many layers with that, whether that be personal, you know, looking at our culture, especially in the US. It's like, you know, the physical vessel is used in advertisement and movies, in which, you know, we're given this perspective of like, we are constantly bombarded by programming of like, this is what this looks like, this is what this is made for, you know, but yet it's just our conditioning to follow that implies that, yeah, so I can look at a body and think, oh, sex, you know, or see, you know, a body part and say, oh, sex. You know, but I mean, there's art even that's beautiful body forms, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't porn, you know. So what makes that is the individual, and the individual's relationship with sex, the individual's personal acceptance, and the ability to detach from the narratives of society that are trying to say this is what it is or isn't. With that, I also think releasing that sexual shame in the sense of if you are seeing something and there is a response to it, you know, also not swinging too far to the other side of the pendulum and attaching shame or guilt to that, you know, because I feel like we also can appreciate the human form in all of its expressions. And I love, especially going back to art, like old statue, you know, old art pieces where it's like they weren't these tight, you know, tight ass,
No,
you
no,
know,
well,
going
actually,
boobs. Yeah, it was like this natural expression of form that was beautifully displayed and conveyed all sorts of emotions, and one of those might be sexual, you know, but it wasn't what we have now attached to it.
well, yeah, because your point, art back then, you know, you see these voluptuous women, and that was actually a status. Like the
Yeah.
heavier you were, the more wealthy you were. So it was actually a status symbol. So when you look at those paintings, you know, being an artist, and you see these voluptuous men and women and all, you know, they weren't what we have in this day and age, and they appreciated that. You know, it wasn't
Yeah.
always just a sexual thing. It was like, I'm appreciating the beauty of the physical form. And
Yeah.
so getting past that in the conditioning of that, right? And saying, like you said, at the end of the day, eh, it's just a body part. And I think what I would ask people to consider is putting yourself in situations where you learn from people like this, because I had spoke once on a podcast where I purposely went to an Airbnb that was clothing optional, and there was nobody else there, and I did this because I was hanging out with a friend who is very body positive, doesn't care what people think, you know, is understands the form, and it really kind of intrigued me. And so I had a conversation with the husband that ran that Airbnb, and there was no other guests there, and ironically, you know, he was fully clothed, but he gave me a lot of pamphlets and stuff and explained that culture. And it really is fascinating, because for them it isn't sex, it literally is just, you're just naked. It's just your
Yeah.
natural form. This is how you were born. That's how you came into the world. It's how
Yep.
you'll exit the world. You know what I mean? And we've made it mean something that it isn't. And so then if we break that down, right, and we now take that deconditioning away, which is what I equate to like Pavlov's dog, right? If anybody knows that research, Pavlov's dog, they train the dog, ring the bell, dog gets food. He associates a bell with food. We associate body parts with sex.
Yeah.
Then once we say we break that down, we take it away, this is where Tantra then would come in, right?
Yeah.
So explain that a little bit on how that can not only elevate our relationships and our sexuality, but how can it also be used, because you said you were a practitioner, as a healing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. So, you know, as far as like in the past life, I was a practitioner. I'm studying this, studying this one. We'll see where that goes. That's a whole another story. But you know, so I love that. I love what you're talking about, you know, as far as the body and associating that higher spiritual principle. And this is what I feel. I feel like that deep down in all, it doesn't matter what your fantasy is. Like, I feel like there's a higher octave to anything that you could say, that someone could want, desire, experience, and we could find a deeper root meaning behind it of something. And ultimately, I feel like that something comes down to, we want to, Tantra is woven together. We want
Right.
to weave together. It's the desire to transcend. It's spirituality and sexuality all in one. And so I feel like we fantasize and we explore and we wonder, but ultimately, like, what it's coming down to is that bonding, that unity expression, to experience that with another soul, because we are one, we are one. And so, yes, getting past first the body shame is important, because if you're talking about tantric sex, okay, which is
Right.
when you're working with a partner, in this, the first thing is you have to be able to be completely embodied in that moment with the other individual. You have to see them from the highest potential, because that's what, once again, when we're talking about love and that unconditional love I spoke of, that is what you're seeing. You are looking at your partner, not necessarily completely sexual, but yes, you are appreciating their body. You are appreciating their aura, their essence, their form, their potential, all of these things. And it's almost a unity in which you are, in a sense, worshiping or seeing the highest potential of your lover in that moment. And they are doing the same to you. So it's like this circular motion, constantly feeding and giving, feeding and giving, feeding and giving of the sexual energy. Well, if we're too busy concerned about what our form looks like, or, oh, if I move that way, do I look funny? Or does he like when I do that? Does she like when I do that? You're here. You're not embodied. You're
Right.
not able to completely be present in the senses and the moment. And, sensory is a big part of it. So, when you're talking about tantric sex, you're talking a lot about setting an environment, setting a mode, having the undivided attention of your lover and giving them your undivided attention. And what happens when you do these things and we get out of here and we get out of the conditioning of what sex is and, all the things, we start to feel the sexual energy rise. And it rises, as I said, beyond the sacral, the limitation of just getting off quick. Looking for that orgasmic experience, which can be, surface level. And we're looking to pull the energy up to this fully present, admiring, loving, full of heart expanding, because our heart chakra is like the highest vibrational chakra, and so you picture two individuals completely submerged in this loving, appreciative, admiring, adoring experience, balancing of masculine and feminine. And with that comes this transcendent experience and weaving together, unity. You merge with your partner and your lover in those moments and can experience like really powerful, moments.
So actually, that energy is being pulled from the lower
Yes.
chakra up
Right.
into the upper chakras.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I know for me, and it's something I read and I've studied, right? Your heart chakra, they can feel it 5 feet, and science has proven this. It's like, to your point, the most potent aura. So when you walk in a room, the first thing people see, or when you come around people, is they feel your heart. It's your heart that hits the most, and it's the heart that's the strongest. So, and it's interesting because you're kind of touching on what the Dr. Margie said was this idea of marriage, right? And she said, and you guys can she said to me, you can kind of relate to this, and I'll speak to that because is where we've been told over and over, what's the ideal marriage? Let me grow old with somebody.
Right.
And she said to her husband, and that's in the podcast, and he said, I don't want to just grow old with someone.
Right.
Right? I want to grow with someone. And so when we're talking about Tantra, and that's why I bring it up, it's like that is, if you want to grow with someone in your life and in your relationship, then of course that's going to carry over to your sexual experiences.
Right.
Right? And that's what we're kind of describing here is you're growing in love, you're growing in intimacy. It's not just the physicality. It's
Correct.
like you described, appreciating every part of their essence and their divinity and who they are, and doing this work. So as you've experienced this, I know you dove into your astrology to kind of make sense of your own sexual awakening. How is that transformed into now your business?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so yes, what I would love to do is help with that, help people to, like I said earlier, the first step is like getting through that shame piece. I know it's like the things we go through, that's what we want to share with the world. So I was like, I found peace in my astrology. I found a place where I could say, this is a part of me. This is a part of my energy. How can I look at this? So I started to do the same for others, to look at their astrology chart and to really dive into the topics of, like I did, not just because with astrology, a lot of times we're like, oh, I want to talk about my partner or my life purpose. But your astrology chart can do so much more than that. And so I don't want to just talk about, partner, but I want to talk about romance. What are you drawn to? Sexual activity. How do you like to enjoy sex? What are you drawn to when it comes to sex? And even I like to, once again, we're talking about releasing that shame. So talking about the kinks, let's just really get in there and say all the gritty taboo things. We'll just say them out loud and see where the chips land. And so I needed that for myself. I needed to look at my chart and say, oh yeah, it's okay that you tend to like to watch sexual activities or your partner being pleasured, and yes, you have all these placements that suggest that you are open in your gender expression of what turns you on. I needed that, and I feel like a lot of people can resonate, because when we can say it's our energy and we can then accept it as not something wrong or shameful, but a part of ourselves, we can start to get closer to that evolved expression. So I started to, look at the astrology chart, as I am certified in galactic astrology. And so I kind of looked at it from the perspectives of sexuality and romance and all of these things. And in an effort to say the things so people can hear somebody acknowledge them in that aspect. And so it feels pretty cool to not know somebody and be like, so this is probably what you like. There's been some shock,
I was going to say, what have you found in doing that?
I have found that it's 100% accurate. So, that's definitely affirming. And there have been different cases in which, it has been eye-opening for people. It gives them permission to then take that information and like I said, start to increase the octave. Because with my sexual experience, when I had all these realizations, the answer wasn't, okay, who can I go out there and have, a threesome with? That isn't the highest expression of this. So, but it did allow me to release the shame and start exploring, okay, why are these things a part of me? Because our consciousness, our soul chose our energy, and there's reasons for it, whether that be through experiences that evolve our conscious awareness, but there is a purpose. So it is a part of us. So therefore it wants to be looked at. And so that is my hope, is with this, that it helps then people to broaden their perspective and look deeper.
What are some of the most common taboos you have seen surrounding sexuality that people are struggling with?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think that, oh gosh, you put me on the spot there now. I'm thinking. I think that I would have to say that there are some particular placements that notate very dark or stronger energy. And especially when we start talking about things like bondage and power dynamics, things like this, that sort of swing that element of pain and pleasure. Anything that kind of goes pain and pleasure. And if I was to take this, because especially, this could be some of the more considered taboo, concepts, that people are oh, that's some freaky shit. You know what I mean? But if we look at it, this is how I see it. is earlier I mentioned that the ascension focus only, spiritual focus only, is actually the yang expression. Like that is actually the yang expression. The feminine,
What is yang? Okay, I was gonna say.
yeah,
Because most people are
yeah.
like, I don't know what yang is. Go ahead.
The masculine. So it's like when we're talking yin and yang, the masculine is like, we want it structured and organized, and like when we're talking love and light, like the light is the masculine. That is the pull towards organized religion and, complete devout service. All of these things are that expression, where the feminine is messy, it's dark, it's feeling, it is the pain and pleasure, it's the emotional side of things, it's the receptive, and so all of these things, when we're talking about this, especially going through Tantra and talking about the yoginis and goddesses like Kali, we're looking at a darker energy that is death and rebirth. Like, it's some dark stuff. We're talking pain and pleasure. Look at Kali, look her up and you will see. But that's the thing. But it's like you have to have those transcendent moments for that new growth. You have to confront your darkness. You have to go deep into the psyche and look at things to be able to transcend it towards a more balanced expression of the light. We can't be all the way over here. We can't be all the way over here. Like, the goal is the center. And so when we're talking about different sexual things, I feel like when I'm looking at a chart and I'm like, oh, you probably like bondage, you probably like edging, you probably like control of orgasm or pain or being restricted. These are darker energies that really, it's this desire to surrender or embrace power. It's that side of you, depending on which side you like to play. If you like to be the submissive one, there's a part of you wanting surrender, like
Right.
abandonment to the logic and the reason and the things that want to structure your life. There's a part of you that wants to give up to what is and surrender to the force of life. And if you're desiring control but you don't embody that, that's your inner badass saying, hey, you got this, step up. Like, you're more powerful than you give yourself credit. And it's a matter of not being in control necessarily over someone, but empowering that control yourself. But energy comes as it's meant to come. So for every one of you that wants to be in control, there's probably the right person that wants to be submissive for you. And it's all good.
Well, I think that's right. It's labeling things also good and bad. I mean, I know I came across a concept in one of my podcasts where violence to heal trauma.
Yeah.
And there's two polar opposites. Almost you would think like, what? You know what I mean? But when I dove deeper in it, it made me go, what? You realize that it actually becomes very self-empowering for people who need to do that. So I could imagine too, sexual energy is the same thing. I mean, I'm finding right now with a lot of my friends, their careers, their businesses have shifted. I have one friend who's now a hypnotherapist that's helping men who are addicted to porn to transform that, to have deeper, intimate sexual energy and commitment with their relationships. I have another friend who is, doing this somatic sexual massage to help people, deal with their shame. So you're seeing this come up more and more and more, and addressing this. So if we know anything about universal consciousness, when you kind of see that everybody, a lot of people are starting to focus on this, it's a topic that we need to look at, because we don't talk about sex. We don't. Outside of the standard elementary school stupid little class I took in 6th grade that was like, these things are the birds and the bees, and that's about it. We're not talking about it anymore. And yet it's something that we all partake in.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's one of those big fibers. It's like finance. We don't talk about that either. You know what I mean? But this is essential to our society.
Yeah.
Sexuality is essential to healthy relationships. It's a healthy way of expressing ourselves. And it's an important topic that people just don't want to touch.
Yeah.
You know, so I've never heard of an astrologer doing this. I don't know of another astrologer doing this. And so I think that alone is brave. But I think it's cool because I've had a couple friends who've done what Cassandra does, did get their readings, and I haven't had any of them come back. They were blown away, and they were just like, "Wow, this was 100% accurate." And in some cases, it did allow them to embrace a side of themselves that, like, I feel seen,
Yeah.
right? And at the end of the day, that's what we all want. So, for those that are completely new to this, and I understand you guys, you might just be in a little bit of shock listening to this going, what the heck what happened? But for those that are new to this concept, where would you suggest that they start in terms of like learning or even,
Yeah.
connecting with other people who might be open to these topics or starting a practice? Like, where do they even start?
Goodness, that's a really good question. So, I being someone that's all about liberated self-expression, my answer to that is always the self to start with. So getting to know yourself, coming to terms with aspects of yourself. I'm also someone like, while I would love to read for you, that's not the only way. And I feel like I gave my example, like 3 times I tried to come out with these aspects of myself. So sometimes we know, like just paying attention. Like if you feel something happens and you're like, oh gosh, like that really turned me on, paying attention, like make a journal, like what's turning you on, because I feel like because at the end of the day, like we're talking about sexual energy and it has power to heal. It is once again a part of ourselves, and yeah, we can talk about conditioning and all that, but start off by just understanding and releasing the shame. So make a journal of like, yeah, that turned me on. I was watching that person eat a popsicle and it was like,
Yeah.
caught my attention. Anything, like it can be little, and start to allow your body and your essence to speak to you. If you're someone that has a spiritual practice, yeah, like meditate on it. Invite your guides to help show you. These are all things that you can do. But yeah, if you feel like you need some affirmation, definitely you can check out, my readings. I definitely supply them as audio form so you can digest them in private because they're a little spicy. So if you're someone that's like, oh, that would be intimidating, to sit and look at your face while you're telling me, all these deep aspects of myself. I do offer them as private audio readings. And then if you did want to get guidance, and because I'm trained in many different modalities afterwards to really digest like what this means for you, I also offer in-person one-on-ones. As far as group stuff, that's a really good question. I would say even simply like finding a good, like you said, somatic practices, or a place that offers like, I'm not talking about like, oh, let's like get our bodies in shape yoga, but like a legit,
Right.
at a spiritual center, like a yogic practice is a great way to, because all of this, we're talking about embodiment. We're talking about coming into the body, connection to the body, and acceptance, and listening to the body. So I feel like even starting kundalini yoga type practices or yogic practices at a spiritual center. Eventually in the future, I'd like to host group workshops, but one step at a time.
That's to come. I would also add to that experience. Like, put yourself in situations. I had a friend recently who went for the first time to a nude beach down in Florida, something she wanted to experience to see. and me putting myself in that thing, and you learn a lot about the people when you take away your prejudgment. And she learned a lot, and she
Yeah.
learned actually how respectful people were, and how actually they honored. And she even had an interaction, which I know she wouldn't mind me sharing this, with a gentleman who came up and talked to her, just talking to her, and he said, we need to get in the water, or we need to I need a towel. And she said, why? And he said, because I'm feeling aroused. And the first time, this was her, didn't know the protocol. And so she said, okay, let's get in the water. And she said, what is the protocol when you do that? And he said, for men, that's what you do. You go and say, I need to get in the water. And so what I found refreshing in that is he wasn't acting on it.
Right.
He wasn't disrespecting her. He was honoring what his body was feeling, and understood that that's a natural reaction, and that I need to, be respectful and either put a towel on or go in the water until it subsides, and understand that that's it, because we are conditioned.
Yeah.
We do have a natural reaction, and that's okay. We're not saying that, right? And I don't want people to think that. Like, we're not saying that that's wrong, but the way you handle it and the way that you
Right.
embody it, it needs to change. And so, she was just blown away how very respectful he was. And she goes, and we just went on and talked, and he became a friend of hers. And so I would say that also, if you're really curious and don't want to do all these things, or don't want to have a reading, but you put yourself in experience, try something new, expand yourself to learn, right? You
Yeah.
may walk away and go, I'm never going to do that again. Or you may walk away and say, I found a part of myself. For her, it was very freeing.
Yeah.
And she appreciated it. So one final thought, and the question I have for you is, what changes would you like to see in how people approach and understand these deeply personal and powerful aspects of their lives? You ended on a big...
Oh boy. I think the biggest thing for me is I would like the conditioned judgments around relationships to change. I think that's the one that gets me the most. I recently have gone through a divorce, and an example of this is I literally daily receive messages from men, and they all typically look the same. It's like once again, that irritates me, because it's like stereotypical, like we're putting boxes. And it's, where are you, and are you available? And I'm like, I'm new to this whole thing, but my response, I used to joke about it. I'm like, well, that's really formal and to the point, and I answer, no, thank you. Good luck hunting. But it's like this concept of like you're shopping, and it's all over TikTok. It's like wifey up, and these men trying to convey themselves as like marriage material, and it's like, I'm like, wow. I ask myself why. Like, I think that's my thing, is it's like, really look at why. Like, really look at your why. What in your life says that the only path forward, the right path forward is this? Like, and why does it have to be noted with a piece of paper and publicly displayed, and like death do us part, and I own you, and I think that is one I truly, with every fiber of my being, feel like it goes against the nature of evolution. And I think that it is, honestly, those perspectives feel very toxic to me, if I'm being honest. That's not to say that there aren't people out there that's the right, the right path for. Because I do believe we can't judge one life by this present existence, and those people maybe had a really good time, the life
Well,
before.
I do know some people who have amazing marriages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And have been beneficial of that, and that works for them. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like a diet.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like a diet. There's not one right diet for everybody and everybody.
Right.
And I think if anything that I learned last week on the last podcast was, she said, we think because we're human, we understand humans. And we don't. Humans
Yeah.
are very layered and they're very complex, and we're all very different. You know, where
Yeah.
one culture, you can have many wives or many there is, it's this labeling things of good and bad, right? Toxic
Right.
rights, all those things that we're trying to get away from and understand that
Right.
it's what works for you and allowing that. And
Right.
that's the hope in sharing these podcasts and having these different perspectives is understanding that we are so complex and we are so
Yeah.
different. You know, it kind of reminds me of I was interviewing one of my brain injury friends, and because they're all very different, she said it's this quote where when you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. That's it.
Yeah.
Because none of them are the same. And I would say that that quote applies to humans. When you've seen and met one human, you've seen and met one human.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all very different. You know what I mean? And I think that's why these conversations are
Yeah.
important, and for you to share that and say,
Yeah.
okay, these aren't right or wrong. It just is.
Right. That's the
This just is
piece.
who you are.
Yeah, that's the
Right?
piece is like realizing the differences and it being okay no matter where you fall on that spectrum, and getting away from feeling like this is what, this is the goal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and respecting each
Yes.
expression. You know what I mean? I think the swing, like you were talking about, from toxic masculine to toxic feminine, we're seeing the after effect. I sat in a research group, I don't know, months ago, where it was guys talking about how they fit in society, and they really don't feel like they fit in society. They feel like,
Yeah.
the feminine has pretty much annihilated them with, I don't need you. We work,
Yeah.
we take care of the family. What do we need you for? But we do need, we need each
Yeah.
other. So I
Yeah.
think those are great insights that you're sharing on how do we change that, and not judging. But there's the tough one. Everybody likes
Yeah.
to judge.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yep. That and the with that, yeah, the idea of feeling anything that has to do with judgment towards this being right, this being wrong. Yeah, all of that stuff. I'm looking forward to shifting. I feel like everything is divine, everything is as intended, everything has a purpose, and we can't mess it up. So,
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. I ask everybody.
all right.
In a world constantly seeking answers, what's the most powerful question you've asked yourself that led to a profound shift in your perspective or life direction?
Goodness gracious. Okay. I could talk about all the sexual stuff, Beckett, but come on. No.
And it can be a question in regard to this topic. It doesn't have to be, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
what is the most powerful question?
Yeah. Powerful question. I think for me, it's like looking at who I am. I think that's probably, especially on this topic, I would say, it's like considering who I am and acceptance of exploring that. And that has shifted a lot for me, for sure. Gosh, I wish I had something better for you. I
Everybody
think
always
that's
says
what
that.
I got.
Well, no, everybody always says that, but sometimes it's the simplest questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of people
Yeah.
say that, like, who am I? What do I believe
Yeah.
now? And I ask this
Yeah.
question so people could take these questions and apply them to themselves
Yeah.
from every podcast. So it doesn't have to be
Love
profound.
it.
It just has to be profound for you. So thank you. I appreciate you being here, my friend.
Thank you.
Is there any parting words you'd like to leave for anybody before we head out?
Whew. I think I'm good. That's a lot to digest, right? Like, I feel we covered a lot. Like, I feel like people, like, if I could picture their faces right now, they would be like wide-eyed, maybe jaw drops, like maybe a little drool. Like, I don't know what to feel right now. Do I feel spiritual? Do I feel turned on? Do I feel really confused? So, yeah, just take it. Whatever you're feeling is okay.
Yeah, all right, fair enough, fair enough. So everybody, I will leave Cassandra's information in the description box below. If you guys found this informative and enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, share if you're on YouTube. Please rate the podcast if you're on the audio platforms. And as always, stay curious, stay empowered, and keep shining your unique light. We'll see you in the next one.